A lot of us are lonely. About a third of American adults say that they are lonely every day, and that includes 14% who say they're lonely constantly. That also includes almost half of adults who say that throughout any given week they are lonely. And that was before the pandemic. So, what is loneliness exactly? Well, it's a deficit. It's the difference between the relationships you want and the relationships you have. And that might be because you've been bereaved. It might be because you don't have the companions that you want, or you don't have somebody in a specific role, like a spouse, that you want. So, what's the problem? Well, loneliness is uncomfortable, but that's not the whole problem. In fact, loneliness really damages people. It is a health problem similar to the health effects of smoking heavily. You see in lonely people greater likeliness of death, greater likeliness of heart trouble, sleep trouble, trouble with your immune system, and various other problems that come about because people are lonely. That's not just because they're socially isolated. So we should care about it. We should help people. Who should we help? Let me tell you about a few myths that I've come across in my research on loneliness. I was able to work with the Barna Group to study who is lonely in the United States and what they say about it. And some of the results might surprise you. So first of all, here's a myth. Loneliness skyrocketed during the pandemic. I was able to get a sample of people before and after most adults were socially isolating at home. And what we found is that there's hardly a difference at all in the number of people who said that they were lonely or in the frequency of their loneliness. We did find that among the group of people who said they were lonely, they said that it was more painful once most adults were socially isolating. Here's another myth. Older adults are lonelier. That's true in some countries, but it's not true in the United States. In the US, among adults, the younger you are, the more likely you are to be lonely. The older you are, the less likely you are to be lonely. That's up until a certain point in time. And there is some truth in this myth, and it's that if you lose your ability to move around, if you become disabled, if you become bereaved, then you are more likely to feel lonely. But that doesn't happen in such a dramatic way, even among the oldest generation of Americans, that they outstrip the youngest generation of adults in loneliness. Here's another myth, that loneliness is the price you pay for privacy. In fact, in the United States, loneliness, in the sense that you lack privacy, they rise together. Here's another one. Going to church solves loneliness. In fact, the people who go to church and the people who don't report about the same rates of loneliness. That was before the pandemic began. We are still waiting to see what exactly happens with church attendance and with people's habits following the need for social distancing. And obviously, the pandemic hasn't quite wrapped up with us yet. But those can lead people to have different expectations of loneliness. When you think that it's because people stayed home or because they're old or because they don't go to church, you might react differently than you otherwise would. So what are some of the solutions? What if you're concerned about other people who might be lonely? Well, here are some answers to what is actually a pretty complicated question. So first of all, you need to lay the groundwork for belongingness. And belongingness involves you being physically close to somebody, involves spending time with them that you both enjoy, involves mutual respect and mutual care. And it also involves having some frequent contact. So this is something that you have to start and continue for a while before that other person finds belongingness, before you do. This is always going to be a mutual thing and not making a project of something. Here's another thing you can do. You can elevate relationships with friends and neighbors rather than just relationships with spouses, boyfriends, girlfriends, and family. Family is important. Spouses are important. In fact, being married is one of the things that predicts low levels of loneliness among people. But so does being close to a neighbor who's not lonely. So does having many friends who you see on a frequent basis, and whose company you enjoy. Those are things that are important and that our society is getting worse at. So elevating those friendships and neighbor relationships is something that people who are concerned about loneliness can start doing. Here's another thing. Don't stigmatize loneliness. It is a gauge. It tells you that something's wrong. It's not a bad feeling that is an indication that somebody is pathetic. It's a very, very common experience. If they don't feel that they can talk to you about it, then you're not going to be able to address it. Don't stigmatize unhappiness. Don't stigmatize other negative emotions. Learn how to talk about the things that people are feeling and seeing. Learn how to talk about things that are disappointing or unpleasant. Instead of just encouraging someone to look on the bright side, help them as they walk through the patch that they're walking through. Also, don't stigmatize singleness. Don't stigmatize age. Not young, not old. These things are just unhelpful. Even though people who are single are more likely to be lonely and people who are young are more likely to be lonely, it's not really that's making them lonely. A lot of what they're looking for is a place of belongingness, a transition that wraps up with a sense of purpose and a sense of who their people are, who they can trust, they can spend time with, whose kitchen they can hang out with, who relaxes around them. So if you can, instead of trying to solve the problem of their situation in life, try to be a good friend. That will do more for loneliness than stigmatizing where they're at demographically. Here's another thing. Loneliness points to the need for secure and warm relationships. So be someone who provides security and be someone who provides warmth. These are important parts of solving our national epidemic of loneliness. I feel very strongly about this. I am part of a military family, so I move around. I experience loneliness a lot. And I think that it is something that we as a culture need to recognize in ourselves, that we need to not just put down roots, not just stay in the same house, but we need to start taking seriously our need for those relationships of belonging and start creating them for each other.